This is a remaster of an old critique with a reworked script, voiceover, footage, and editing. The old video is in the description below for posterity. 1, 2, 3. When all seems lost, when it seems like the sky itself is crashing down on you, what do? Hellblade SENUA'S Sacrifice gives us an answer that's, on the surface, incredibly simple and finds power in that simplicity. But the journey to get there is layered, nuanced, and intimate. When it released in 2017, it was hailed as a technical marvel, but even a cursory look at some of the behind-the-scenes footage its developer, Ninja Theory, released shows a game that is so much more than its graphics. SENUA'S Sacrifice is thrifty in its creation, grandiose in its world building, inventive in its design, and delicate in its portrayal of psychosis. It asserts itself as much more than just its impressive visuals, and takes the player on a journey that leaves a scar. In fact, Ninja Theory budgeted the development of Hellblade so that it only had to sell 200 to 300,000 copies of the game to make their money back, and it only sold for £25. Compare this to Spider-Man 2 that needed to sell 7.2 million copies. Following the polarizing release of the DMC remake in 2013, Ninja Theory pivoted into trying something new. Hellblade was the first game the studio funded themselves, built by a team of just 15 people. Its visuals aren't just breathtaking, but they're tied together by out-of-the-box thinking and first-draft ideas like tying several GoPros together to help with the performance capture. Self-funded, self-directed, while bringing in useful voices from the mental health community to make sure they handled the story with tact. Purely from an industry standpoint, Hellblade is a marvel that should have served as a blueprint after it released, but unfortunately fell victim to the sort of bullshit that it was created to challenge. But we'll get to the sequel another time. The creative director, Tamim Antoniades, described it as an independent AAA, which is a dumb label, but it shows the ambitious fire lit under SENUA and the people who gave birth to her. And that is one of the things I find so endearing about Hellblade from the offset. The surface level dumbness that peels away to show something beautiful and terrifying. Hellblade is a dumb, on-the-nose name that brings about ideas of a gleeful hack-and-slash action game like Heavenly Sword or Devil May Cry. Yet, it's a direct reference to the journey it takes the player on. SENUA sets out to confront Hela with a mystical god-killing blade. A video game where you fight Vikings, positioning itself as a deep dive into the experience of having psychosis sounds dumb, but when the credits roll, what you feel is visceral, complemented by the fact Ninja Theory consulted with experts and sufferers of psychosis to try and get it right. So, let's talk about it. This is a commentary and critique of Hellblade SENUA'S Sacrifice. We open with a voice and a question.
Hello? Who are you?
SENUA, aboard a rough-shapen boat, paddles through the mist and gloom on her way to Helheim. Corpses, bones, and greys colour her way, and for a lengthy period the player is left alone with SENUA'S thoughts. Not our own, but SENUA'S. Hellblade doesn't leave you much headspace for contemplation. The voices in SENUA'S head, more commonly referred to as the Furies, are relentless throughout our journey, and a lot of the adoration fans have for the game comes from how the sound design was carefully sculpted to be both entrancing and intimidating. This is the most famous part of the game, so let's talk about it now so we can get into more uncharted territory later. There are 13 voices that haunt SENUA. The 9 Furies, her lover Dillion, her mentor Druth, her father, and her mother. And due to the immersive nature of the game, I go so far as to add a 14th voice. The players. If you're anything like me, you'll likely find yourself chatting away to the protagonist when locked into a game. Sometimes happily, sometimes encouragingly, and sometimes, probably most of the time, aggressively.
Oh, get up, you Egypt!
Here, that's what we are, simply another voice. This isn't at all how psychosis works, but for the sake of argument, you could say that for each traumatic event in her life, SENUA has collected a new Fury, and after the tragic death of her beloved, we've joined their ranks as the latest addition. The Furies are SENUA'S alarm system and her betrayers, painting danger with hisses, whispers, and yells. They're the things that push her onwards and the things that hold her back, and playing the game without headphones does Ninja Theory a disservice. I'm not normally one to tell you can play a game wrong, but in this case, yeah. In a Behind the Theory episode, audio director David Garcia said, "To me, the challenge in audio is creating empathy. People with psychosis have elements in their head that we had to replicate with audio. We could have done beautiful things that are just random, but everything we did has a deep meaning that tied back to what we learned from speaking to people with psychosis. When it comes to games, I think it's easy for us to forget about audio sometimes. It's only really noticeable when it's wrong, but great sounds, great music, great mixing can add to the tactility of a game. The team used a 3DO binaural microphone to record the Furies, and as a result, we're faced with overlapping words, sounds, and emotions racing atop our skull. Due to how it blew up a few years ago, thanks to Cracked, you probably know what ASMR is. Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, where someone uses particular sounds to trigger a sense of relaxation. For those of us lucky to know our triggers, it can be insanely soothing, and no, it's not a sex thing.
What a giant penis you have.
Okay, for some people it's a sex thing, but the opening of the game with the earphones in uses one of these common triggers to ease us in. Soft, breathy whispering with renounced, sibilant sounds. I've used ASMR videos to sleep in the past, the same way I know some of you use videos like this one to fall asleep. And it's with that knowledge that I'd like to soothingly tell you about this video sponsor, Manta Sleep. I struggle to sleep. Once upon a time, I would stick a YouTube video on, pop my phone on the bedside table and let it play while I snoozed, but now that I'm married, I can't do that anymore. White Light's voice would wake my wife up and then everyone would be mad. I tried headphones, but I'd wake up the next morning with them lost somewhere in the bed, and worse yet, I couldn't sleep on my side because they'd be uncomfortable in my ears. Enter Manta Sleep Mask Sound, a sleep mask with built-in headphones that's comfortable no matter what position you sleep in. They've got all kinds of sleepwear. Some of you might like something weighted or something soothing on the eyes, but for me, it's the headphones. The eye cups are C-shaped and the headphones are flat, meaning you can wear the mask on your side and it's still very comfortable. The battery life is 20 hours, which is 2 times the leading competition, and there's no audible battery notifications at 1000 decibels to wake you up in the middle of the night. I already used Manta before they reached out, so this sponsorship was an easy one. Treat yourself or someone else by clicking the link below, and make sure to use my code MONTYXANDER for 10% off your order. Thanks again to Manta Sleep, and on with the video. Chipo Chung, the head Fury, has clearly been directed differently from the others. She remains calm and soothing whenever she speaks, using these classic ASMR techniques. In contrast, the other Furies leap between being soft-spoken 1 second and screaming at us the next.
Look really clearly.
Focus, Senua.
Focus, and you'll see.
For those of you who've experienced ASMR content and shriveled up like a geriatric Bobby at the sound, it's likely you suffer from misophonia, a disorder where hearing any of these sounds like chewing or even yawning results in emotions that could be described as a fight or flight response. If you do suffer from this, God help you, because the second the head Fury breathes her first fascinating question in our ear, it's likely your guard will be firmly up. Even if that's not the case, Hellblade pulls out all of the stops to intimidate and unnerve the player. There's a moment right here in the boat where the Furies ask Senua if she can see some enemies on the coastline, and if we don't turn our camera to search the gloom, they'll mock her. Of course she can't see them, she's not looking. Why aren't you looking? But strangely, it's in the sound that a personal gripe of mine comes to bear. Ninja Theory prioritized portraying psychosis as truthfully as they could, and because that's where Hellblade's brilliance shines, it makes sense that so much time and effort was put there. But the polish on show with stuff like the Furies highlights gaps in other areas, namely the accents. It's a nitpick, but the accents bother me.
Oh, she heard us. There's no going back.
Who is Senua? She's a Pict, the Painted People, a subset of the Celts, a peoples of Scotland so intimidating when it came to battle that the Romans built Hadrian's Wall to keep them away. The wall did not keep them away. Before my proud, noble country was civilized, we formed numerous tribes and clans. We lived off the land, reared our sheep, occasionally got into fights with each other, but always united against a common enemy. A common enemy like the Vikings, or Margaret Thatcher after she ordered a cull of her haggis leading to the creature to go extinct. With Senua being a Pict, Ninja Theory have set her origins in the Isle of Orkney, just off the coast of Scotland. Whenever he was asked about the setting of the game in interviews, Tamim Antoniades flagged that this historical era when the Vikings wiped out the Picts was untapped as a game location, so that stood out to them. And there's a whirl of inspirations and mythologies that have soaked into SENUA'S journey. The inspiration for SENUA herself was from the discovery of a shrine for the Celtic goddess SENU'a by a bunch of amateur diggers with cheap metal detectors. It is strongly believed that SENU'a was a goddess of the water, which in Celtic tradition was a symbol of healing, making the game's opening pretty noteworthy, what with SENUA travelling to Helheim via river. Of course, it could also be because the Vikings were obsessed with shipbuilding in the sea, so to reach Helheim you would need to set sail. That word, Vikings, is never mentioned in Hellblade's 10 Hours. Instead, they're naturally labelled as the Northmen, making them more alien as a force of nature for SENUA to overcome. But be in no doubt, when it said that SENUA'S Orkney tribe was ransacked, it was absolutely at the hands of the Vikings. In his book The Northern Earldoms, Michael Lynch writes, "The Viking Age heralded the demise of Pictish political structures. Norse incursions into the northern and western parts of Scotland disrupted Pictish society, accelerating their decline and assimilation." And that is half true. Historically, the Picts were a separate faction in Scotland, and around the end of the 8th century, when Hellblade takes place, they were slowly being assimilated into wider Scottish culture. Whether that was through marriage between clans or conquest, their gods started to fizzle away and their language started to die off, going from Pictish to Gaelic. Don't just take my word for it, here's Alfred Smythe in his work Warlords and Holy Men. The decline of the Picts cannot be solely attributed to Viking aggression. It was the combination of Norse invasions and the strategic expansion of the Gaelic Scots that dismantled Pictish society, paving the way for the unified kingdom of Alba. There is a vast, complicated history here, but there's one thing historians can agree on. The painted people of Orkney were wiped out mainly by Vikings, but other dominant clans saw it as an opportunity to seize more land. That cunning and betrayal is characterized in SENUA'S father, Zimbel, but the assimilation of cultures mainly comes through with Druth. Despite being a Pict, SENUA was taught Norse mythology by her wild man mentor Druth, and the stories and tales he told enraptured her. This meant that when her lover Dillion was inevitably murdered by the Vikings, she ventured into Helheim to save his soul. Being of her own time, she doesn't realise that she suffers from psychosis, instead believing that she's cursed with an inner darkness.
When they asked me if I wanted to do that job with the acting, I was like, well, I kind of want to, but I'm really scared, so I was thinking about saying no. But imagine if I had said no that day, like I would not be sitting here. So I think take your chances if they're there, just try it even if you're scared about it.
It does break my heart that SENUA'S voice wasn't Scottish, but Melina Juergens, who plays her, does a fantastic job of presenting the Pictish warrior's naked, emotional exposure throughout the course of the game. Juergens won a BAFTA for her performance, and she was originally Ninja Theory's video editor, coaxed into the role. She's of German descent, so SENUA'S accent has a twang to it that other characters' voices don't. We don't know what the Picts sounded like, and their language is closer to Welsh when written down, so Hellblade can coast on that fact when it comes to how she speaks. But SENUA is the only character who gets away with that, purely because Melina Juergens has a twang that makes her accent initially unplaceable. We are in Orkney, off the coast of Scotland. The Picts were a Scottish tribe. Ninja Theory is an English studio based way down in the south of Cambridge, so they didn't pull any Scottish actors into the booth to voice the cast. They pulled in English actors. Budget and location can't be used as an excuse here. Just earlier this year, the Chinese Room, an indie studio based in the English city of Brighton, released Still Wakes the Deep.
But I run a tight ship. Do you understand me? A tight ship.
Technically, it's no shit.
Shut your gob, you Ned prick!
They didn't just use Scottish accents for their characters, they brought in dialects and sounds from across every possible region of Scotland to add to the authenticity. Dillion, the Furies, SENUA'S mother and father, they all have English accents. Not even regional accents, so there's a wide array of sounds to pull from, but the white bread English sound you know all too well from fantasy games. It would have been truly powerful to hear some Scots in their language, if not Gaelic. I mean, no, you know, a wee bit of Scots lingo Ninja Theory. No, you know, a wee snip of where she hails fae. The only character who sounds like he's from the right area is Druth, and even then, he's Irish, not Scottish.
For my tales of the Northmen, they call me Druth. A liar.
He's lost.
An old fool.
He's not ready.
Druth is my truth.
As Senua passes into the outer rim of Helheim, she looks back at the world she's left behind and kicks her boat away, past the point of no return. The Fury's unreliable nature is juxtaposed by the much more trustworthy voice of Druth, humming out of the dark when Senua is ordered to focus on a runestone. Druth isn't actually here, he's dead. Probably. He was also a Pict, taken slave by the Vikings. Under torture, he confessed where many tribes were hiding from the Northmen. As a rule, we're full of doubt when the Furies give us a command, but with Druth, his voice is calming and somber. He tells Senua of Hela, planting the mythical foundation of Senua's story and setting up our overarching goal: find Hela, save Dillion's soul. If a character appears to speak to Senua, that uncanny sense of seeing a live-action clip bleeding into the world will come through really strongly. Again, adding to the sense that Senua's vision is skewed. The most realistic image we see in the game, Druth leaning out of the darkness to introduce himself to her, simply isn't there, adding an unnerving ethereal quality to them. They're there and not there, just like us. We can't change the journey Senua will go through. She'll suffer with or without us.
There's no doubt about it. The source of the darkness is in Helheim. And the goddess Hela holds his soul there.
And speaking of suffering, let's talk combat. The door ahead is blocked off and Senua has a choice to make. She can either go right to face the fire giant Surt, or take the door on the left and face Valravyn. Ultimately, we have to battle both, but by providing the illusion of choice, the game teases the player once more.
I'll give you what you want. I won't resist anymore. Just give him back.
The dark presence, no, not that one Alan Wake fans, that looms down on her doesn't speak, it simply watches, but Senua seems to recognize it. Who is this? Why is she so afraid of it? And why does it infect her so viciously? With a shriek and a clang, a monstrous Northman cuts Senua down and she collapses. A message crawls on screen. The dark rot will grow each time you fail. If the rot reaches Senua's head, her quest is over and all progress will be lost. This is a lie. But I didn't know that the first time through. Very few did. The game led us down the long and winding road of believing permadeath was a mechanic when in fact, it isn't. And notably, it's the only piece of in-game text in the whole adventure to reinforce the severity of what it's trying to say. The game has broken its rules regarding immersion to tell us this, so it must be important, right? Wrong. The rot will grow up Senua's arm every time we die, a physical representation of the unnecessary guilt Senua carries, like Lady Macbeth desperately scrubbing at her hands after the murder of the king. Spoilers for a 400-year-old play. Senua's sword hand, her killing hand, is irreversibly blackened despite never harming a soul prior to the game's beginning. This story, just like the Furies in the world design, is proving to be untrustworthy. I believed that I would be reset if I died one too many times, but the ambiguity of the message, the fact it doesn't tell us how many lives Senua has, leads to a state of paranoia. We become extra cautious in battle. The tension is tripled during bosses, and worst of all, the game never, even once the credits roll, tells us that our progress was safe all along. It wasn't until the halfway point, when hacking gauntlets of enemies and dying in the sea of corpses, that I started to suspect something was amiss. Even then, we can't be absolutely sure, so our guard remains up. Even in the final battle, where unlimited waves of enemies are tossed at Senua until she's defeated, eking out this fight, mocking us for our cautious skill. And if we take the door on the right first, the fire giant tests that skill.
Surt, the fire giant has answered.
Sutra, or Surt in English pronunciation, means scorched or black one. His existence can be traced back to the creation of the universe. He came into being with the forming of his home, Muspelheim. A being of pure chaos, Surt hated Odin and his ilk. He doesn't make much of an appearance in Norse tales, quietly biding his time, working at his forge, sweating over a blade he creates with one purpose in mind: to destroy the gods at Ragnarok. In the tales, he's a close ally of Hela, and the pair build the ship of Ragnarok, which Hela will use to transport the undead to attack the force of Asgard. Even by Norse standards, he's a baddie. But for Senua, he serves another purpose. He embodies one of her greatest fears, fire. In his section, we've got to travel through the remains of a village that was ransacked and set ablaze. The game even kindly gifts us with a raging flame to race from, accompanied by a colour palette emblazoned by bright, painful oranges. If the flame catches up to us, Senua will die gruesomely. The volume gets cranked, the Fury's screeches are distorted, and initially it seems like this is the ransacking of Senua's village. That couldn't be further from the truth. Instead, it's the moment when Senua was chased out of Dillion's village by an angry mob, convinced that she had cursed them. But is it just that though? See, finding Surt's monument, Senua presses her fingers against the stones and a horrific, fast-paced vision lashes out at us in harsh reds. A vision from Senua's past. Who is the figure? Why do they haunt each step that Senua takes? Playing as the warrior from the wilds is hardly an empowerment fantasy. Senua is a skilled warrior, sure, and the game implies that her psychosis gives her heightened awareness of her enemies, something we see in the gameplay. I don't really like this something, mental illness is a superpower, like when we see autistic people being presented as super brainy. She has a simple light attack, heavy attack, charge attack, kick, dodge, block, and parry, and ultimately, these are all she needs to keep each battle engaging. 5 enemy types are all we have, but all we'll need for the game's length, because none of our fights overstay their welcome and they're juggled regularly enough to offer up variety. Standard Grunt, Shield Man, Big Bastard, Bigger Bastard, and Flips and Kicks. All of these enemies evolve later in the game to become formless to add extra challenge to the final stages. The swordplay feels hefty. Despite the fact Senua can be quite agile when we want her to be, each swing of her sword has a split-second delay to increase the tension of the moment, without needing to over-rely on laborious animations. Editor's note, remember that point for when we talk about the sequel. It will return. Soon, Senua will gain the ability to activate a slowdown meter during battle if she's able to charge it up. All enemies, especially the irritating shield enemies, practically freeze. If they're in their shadowy spectral forms, this power makes them corporeal, so we can slash them away. The reality is that the combat in Senua's Sacrifice won't and didn't revolutionize action games, but it is cohesive, polished, and grows as the adventure goes on because she gains new abilities. The slowdown and the pulsing blue charge attack. Both of these and the parry serve more than one purpose, so there's dimension to our use. Parrying specifically is king. It almost completely fills Senua's slow ability, makes ethereal enemies tangible, and momentarily stuns them. Slow doesn't just speed Senua up or freeze enemies, it also heals her completely. Her charge attack doesn't just deal extra damage, it breaks through ethereal enemies with a powerful shining explosion that doesn't make Senua feel powerful, but certainly displays the power of her god-killing blade.
You can evade still to move around, and you can still let go of it to move around. What's more important? Selling the idea of directional blocks that isn't very common in a game, so you have to make it very obvious, or giving you that freedom at the expense of that.
This is a clip from 2015, over 2 years before the game released, and we see that Ninja Theory were experimenting with a more flamboyant combat system. The charge attack would send enemies flying, ducking was a feature, directional blocks were considered, but Ninja Theory found them limiting. It made it difficult for Senua to battle numerous enemies at once because swapping between them felt finicky and frustrating. Ambushes are abound in Senua's Sacrifice. They make us feel pressured and suffocated while necessitating the Furies. While Senua's battles do feel grounded and weighty, and while Ninja Theory wanted to avoid complex and flashy combos, there are combo attacks in Senua's Sacrifice. They're just invisible. Swapping between light attacks, heavy attacks, the kick and the charge will give you variations in her movesets, and will also crank up her general speed. But that isn't something the game ever really communicates, and it's an area where I think the Furies could help out. Originally, the Furies were going to be visually represented in combat, leaping in as projections to help in fights. About a year from release, it even seemed like Senua would wind up attacks that would then be echoed by these voices in the physical world. None of this came to fruition, but the voices still play a pivotal part in the combat. The camera is closed in, squeezing Senua so we can barely see an inch either side, and rotating the camera is achingly slow, so the only protection against the enemies is to trust in the voices when they bark orders like, "He's behind you," or "On your right." However, yes, there's a however, in fact there are a couple of howevers in this video, even masterpieces have flaws, the combat could have had more dimension if the Furies were enhanced. They're too reliable in battle. It seems the only time we can 100% trust them is when we're locking steel with one of the grisly Northmen. While the Furies are obviously invested in Senua's success, if she dies, they die, they don't quite know that yet. It's a realization they'll collectively come to later, so having them be more antagonistic during battle could help set up that mountain to climb. They wouldn't have to necessarily trick the player or lie, but their orders could be more ambiguous. Perhaps rather than saying, "He's behind you," giving a clear direction for Senua to face, they could say something like, "They're all around, so we know that there's danger, but the onus is on us to find it." To play devil's advocate, it could be argued that keeping the Furies intensely honest and helpful during combat increases our reliance on them, highlighting the symbiotic relationship between Senua and the Voices. Ninja Theory have claimed they are inspired by 1v1 combat systems like Mortal Kombat, but I don't see those inspirations here, not least because Senua will fight multiple monsters at once. Mechanically, it seems that inspiration got lost the further into development they went. There aren't complex or spectacular combos that a player needs to memorize here. Senua may only have a handful of actions in her toolkit, but every battle demands quick-fire decision-making to come out on top because the fights are fast-paced and frenetic purely because of the weight of the weapons, the horrifying sound design, and Senua's fragility. Ungenerously, I counted 44 choices I had to make in the span of a 60-second encounter. There's rarely time to take a breath, and that makes fighting feel intense. Tamim Antoniadis told us, "I really wanted to capture the essence of Senua. She should feel grounded. There should be an anger that drives her attacks. There is a wildness about her, but also a sense of discipline that she's achieved through years of training." Hellblade is an angry game and an angry series, and across all disciplines we see that rage. Speed is key here. Even though there's downtime in combat, those beats where enemies slowly, confidently trudge towards Senua, fighting never feels sluggish. Our first boss, Surt, shows this off best.
Always do.
This is my battle. I have to face it alone, away from you.
Where will you go?
I don't know.
Reaching her goal, Senua summons Surt and he burns her alive, a fire so hot that her brain seeks an escape, latching onto a time long ago when she resolved to journey into the wilderness. She promised Dillion that, no matter how long it took, she would come back for him when she found what she was looking for. In present day, that promise is her drive. She didn't come back in time. When she returned from the wilds, Dillion had already been slaughtered by the Vikings. There isn't much time to ruminate on this, unfortunately, because our first official boss fight has entered the ring. It's time for Surt. He's not quite the fiery giant Norse mythology has led us to believe, but he still paints an imposing picture. Senua is hardly small, but he towers over her, and with the camera so close in, it doesn't feel like there's anywhere to run when he lumbers towards us, his fiery greatsword almost colliding with the screen. The arena we face him in is horrifying. Frozen yet still burning corpses huddled in pain and fear crumble as we roll into them. A fire rages around, creating a wall of flame that's blinding. There's no escape. Considering the connection Senua's father has to fire and how he towers over her in his scenes, I believe making Surt's character design a large, imposing beast of a man is to tie it back to him. Every battle comes from the realm of Senua's mind, and Ninja Theory aren't shying away from the fact every demon she battles comes from a past trauma. I'm not saying Surt represents Senua's father, we fight a boss later that does exactly that, but the essence of her father and the beastly Northmen singe his design. Defeating Surt, Druth returns with one of the most memorable quotes from the game.
For every battle won, a greater battle takes its place. And so it goes, until we fall. And in the end, we all fall. Even the gods have their time. Yet we still go on. Why?
And with those words, we see the moment when Druth died, and we hear his promise to guide Senua in this life and the next. On to Valravyn. Unlike Surt, Valravyn isn't from Norse mythology. He's a creature from Scandinavian folklore, true, but he has no place in Norse ballads or stories that we know of. Put simply, Valravyn is often referenced as a raven who devours the slain, but if you'll humour me, I was able to find the most common tale concerning him. There are many variations, but this one is my favourite. So gather round the campfire, kids, and let me tell you the story of Valravyn. A long time ago, there was a fair maiden called Ermeline. She lived with her family in a castle on an island in the middle of the ocean. She loved her mother and father very much and played with her older brother every day, who she admired greatly. But one day, her mother became very ill and eventually passed away. Her father grieved for 40 days and 40 nights before ultimately remarrying. Ermeline hated this new woman who had replaced her mother. She was cruel and would beat her brother regularly. She began to call her Traldmor, the Troll Mother. When the stepmother discovered this, she fell into a blind fury and took her rage out on Ermeline's brother, for she was secretly a creature of magic. One dark night, she transformed Ermeline's brother into a hideous beast, a mix of raven and man, the Valravyn. She told the brother that this curse would only be broken once Ermeline had given birth to a child. He would have to drink the child's blood. Years passed and Ermeline mourned her brother, who would regularly visit her and listen to her secrets. But, unbeknownst to Ermeline, the Valravyn was secretly biding his time, waiting for her to birth a child. Eventually, Ermeline fell in love, married, and had a beautiful baby girl. The following evening, the Valravyn visited her to see his niece. "She looks like you," he remarked. "I'm glad," Ermeline said. "For the first time I am envious of you, Valravyn, for I have been locked in this chamber waiting for her for months now. You get to see the world every night." The Valravyn, with a glint in his eye, looked to his sister. "Well, climb on my back and I'll show you. Bring your child too, she should see the castle from the sky." Ermeline gathered her baby in bundles of blankets and climbed upon the Valravyn's back. The three soared through the icy night, with the moon watching them gloomily from on high. Without saying a word, the Valravyn bucked his sister from his back and she plummeted to her death. The baby would have gone that way as well if the Valravyn hadn't managed to catch one of its blankets with its talons. With a shriek, he tore the child's heart from her chest and drank her blood. For a moment, the Valravyn felt peace like he'd not felt for years. He felt, once again, human. But of course, the raven has an advantage over man. Ravens can fly, and the Valravyn, soaring high above the castle, no longer had his wings. Just like his sister and niece, he tumbled to his death, impaling himself on the parapet of the castle for the chambermaid to find the next morning. Not the most cheery of stories, but it gives a sense of the Valravyn's cruelty in the legends that this creature exists in, and in Hellblade's case, the god of illusion is no different. For many players, he may be the most irritating enemy in the game.
To break the seal, align the ravens with the mark of Valravyn.
Valravyn's section focuses less on combat and more on puzzles, so we're going to take the time to look at the other half of Hellblade's game design. There's been a lot of misguided criticism of Hellblade's puzzles. In the reviews that initially came out upon the game's release, we got critiques like this. The puzzles task you with finding runes and symbols hidden in the shadows around you. They're almost all the same. You find a locked door with a rune engraved on it, and then venture out to find that rune in the wild. Sometimes it's simply painted on a wall, and other times it's hidden in the shape of a tree or building. In any case, it's never fun or challenging, just a lot of tedious busywork. I think that's unfair. By my count, there are minimum 6 puzzle types in the game, and while a lot of them are connected by the thread of perspective, there's a shocking amount of variety here while staying true to what Hellblade is conceptually. The most common puzzle is finding a rune shape in the world, but we also need to align parts of the environment to make them physical, navigate a looping labyrinth, lighting torches to find the way, feel our way through darkness using vibration and sound, hop between two worlds to overcome obstacles, something that was very novel for 2017 and a technical achievement, and soon we'll come face to face with Valravyn's illusion gates. Hellblade 1's perspective puzzles aren't samey, and the variety in scenario and context makes them engaging while reinforcing SENUA'S characterization and the message of the game, and they align the player with SENUA. Let's take an example. Earlier in the game, Druth instructs SENUA on how to open a closed door in front of her. It's locked behind a strange runic symbol, sparking a demonic red. SENUA needs to interrogate the space, find a part of the world, like a shadow, that looks like this rune. Finding messages and hints in the world is part of established game design, but Hellblade makes the connection between player and player character explicit. In the making of video that comes with the game, the devs highlight a few of the experiences of those suffering from psychosis. One of them was seeing patterns where they rationally know there shouldn't be any. These puzzles don't exist on top of the world, they pull the world in. They necessitate an environment that is designed with the puzzle in mind. In Hellblade's case, this is a deep need in our character. You don't need to find the runes, Senua does. If, for example, Kratos came charging up to one of these doors, he'd just kick it open. In the real world, if any of this takes place in the real world, these doors are just sitting, waiting to be opened. But to Senua, an arbitrary code flashes up, blocking passage until she can unlock its secrets. This connects to her other symptoms too, because it's the Furies, it's Druth who tell us we need to find the runes to enter. And beautifully, these runes are all historically accurate, so there are messages buried in the messages.
The Northmen say that Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, and that the world of men was formed from his corpse.
If we explore the game in full, we'll find many optional runestones over the course of the story, and as a reward for our curiosity, we'll be gifted with stories by Druth. We get to hear the tales he told Senua when she was lost in the wilderness. Tales of Norse mythology which are often relevant to specific moments of her journey, such as the story of Hervor and how a father's actions damned his daughter, just as how the cruelty of Senua's father damned her. Some of the stories also hinted advice that Senua must take to heart, like accepting the death of a cherished one during the story of Baldur. Each stone has an appropriate letter associated to them. If we uncover them all, and find a copy of the Elder Fultar alphabet, and pore over that to uncover a translation, a message reads, "Seek Hela's truth in mirror, gods betray us. Unmask fear." Weird, wonder what that means, but looking at this secret message, we can see two of the game's most powerful motifs already in play. The first is that by interpreting these three phrases, we learn a bit more about Senua's journey and what it's all about. Senua must face the truth that Dillion is gone. The gods she battles in her journey are a betrayal. They're not real, never were, and she must unmask her anxiety and fear, put a face to it, in the form of her father, Zimbel. The second is a little more meta. In keeping with the game's overall approach to puzzles, it's all about patterns. In games, we are conditioned to see patterns where there might be none, aligning ourselves with Senua as a character. These runestones are a key example. At no point does the game spell out that each letter, if translated, would combine to spell out a message that lays bare the game's truth. But we've played games before, and games in their absurdity and beauty often have absurd logic tied to their mechanics that we embrace and go with. Take Hollow Knight. We understand that if we walk into a room and the door locks, the best way to get out of that room is by killing all surrounding enemies rather than just using a key. Jumping back to these locked runic doors, each rune, if translated, means something. This first rune that Druth points out is the one we'll see most throughout the story. It's called Manas. It represents the self, support, assistance, and family. At its core, Hellblade is a story about Senua dealing with her sense of self, reliving the trauma of her family with the assistance of the voices in her head. More specifically to this moment, we the player are experiencing assistance from both Druth and the Furies. They're acting as a tutorial. During this section with Valravyn, the puzzle mechanics change. They still rely on perspective, but they have a twist.
The song. Valravyn's song. It's over here.
Under Valravyn's watchful eye, Senua needs to find illusory gates, enter through them to change the world somehow, and then use these changes to navigate to a vantage point where you can line up Valravyn's runic symbol to complete it, thus opening a door to the next area. The puzzles themselves, while fascinating and impressive technically, remember this was back in 2017, might get on the player's tits because we need to rewire our brains. Perspective puzzles are nothing new in games, and Hellblade takes from the best in this case, but the hoops we need to jump through can be aggravating at first. This is mainly because sometimes the changes are incredibly subtle. It's not as simple as jogging over to a gate, walking through and jogging over to the next part of a level. You need to scour the landscape, parse the riddle of its environment, and understand what shifted. While doing this, you'll spot the Raven God watching you out of the corner of your eye, only to turn into a skeletal husk when you get close to him. It's disconcerting, and oh look, here's a puzzle room. It's a perfect example again. Prior to reaching the door, we can see Valravyn twitching on what looks like a battle arena. Senua roars at him to challenge her, and we race down to take him on, but as we pass a tree, he turns back to his skeletal form. Unlike Surt, which was covered in a steep rise in intensity, Valravyn's section is a slow crawl of frustration. He mocks us without words, pointing the way to his inevitable confrontation, egged on by the Furies. Once Senua activates this specific perspective puzzle, she turns and the voices panic. Which symbols are the right ones? It's while Senua travels through Valravyn's domain that we learn more about her past. She journeyed into the wilds to try and purge her darkness, and there she met Druth. He mentored her in the ways of legend and mythology. Whilst a lot of Senua's tale is based on the Norse gods, we are explicitly told that Druth knows many tongues and told her many tales. It's likely he sung the ballad of Valravyn one cold, lonely night, and her mind has absorbed it into Norse mythology.
It didn't end well in the wilds. It never does. You think you can overcome the darkness, make sense of it.
Valravyn's boss fight is more fast-paced than going toe-to-toe with Surt. Seeing him in full, we can intriguingly draw some similarities between Druth's appearance and Valravyn's. Druth wears thick cloaks of animal fur and feathers on his head. He wears a leather cap adorned with the skull of a small animal with a 3-pronged sigil on top of it. A 3-pronged sigil. Valravyn's symbol has 3 prongs, the skull of a small animal, like perhaps a mouse or a vole like a raven would prey on. He wears explicitly black feathers like that of a raven's as well. Just like how Surt's design was drawn from Senua's vivid imagination and memory, it is likely Valravyn was sketched from a monstrous, twisted version of Druth. We battle the creature under a gargantuan nest. Despite Valravyn bringing a cool twist to the fight in the form of blanketing himself in darkness, resulting in us needing to use our new slowdownometer, he's a less interesting battle than Surt. For a start, he summons lesser enemies halfway through this fight for no reason whatsoever, a consistent pet peeve of mine. It's a crutch for a boss fight, not interesting design. It dilutes the anticipation we felt leading up to Valravyn. It's him that's pissed us off, it's him that's mocked us, it's him that's played with us, and all we want in this moment is to get our hands on him, not be distracted by the Northmen. It's a weak counterpoint, but it could be argued that summoning enemies during a boss is a solid means of showing a player how far they've grown across a game, but Senua faces Valravyn in the first third. Introducing mobs during his boss serves nothing.
With every battle, the darkness grows stronger. Every victory bringing her closer to defeat.
Senua remarks that she's battled Valravyn before during her time in the wilds, likely hallucinating the creature when she trained with Druth. Striking him down, Senua breaks the second seal on the door. Hela awaits. Senua can see clearly now the raven's gone. The sun cascades down, painting everything in a golden hue. There's a sense of climax around defeating our 2 gods and opening the door. Just around the corner lies Hela. The lighting is to blame for lulling us into a false sense of security. Bright pockets of colour illuminate her path as she faces a vision of her dead mother, Galena. Galena reveals that she too had a form of psychosis, but her soothing presence, it seems, was able to keep Senua's darkness away. Only one man could stain that presence.
There is no one here but me.
Not you.
Did you think that I would let you go? That you lost me back in the wilds?
This latest voice of Zimbel, the voice of the darkness, comes through with a gravelly, ethereal bass. With earphones on, this can worm deep into us, a stark contrast from the hushed whispers of everyone else. It condemns Senua, blaming her for Dillion's death, and we immediately feel a resistance to his words, but just like how Senua herself feels, you're psychologically moulded by the sound of the voice into believing it. When we come to Dillion's body, we see what horrific act started Senua's journey. His corpse is strung up, his back peeled away by hooks to bake the meat underneath. As interesting as it is to believe that this is historically accurate, that Vikings did this to people, there's no accurate description of it out with Norse epics. It's called the Blodurn, or Blood Eagle, a ritualistic execution often reserved for noblemen. We get a sense from Hellblade's flashbacks that Dillion's father was the chief of his village, making him noble blood. According to the legends, the Vikings would sever the victim's spine with a sharp tool and pull the lungs out through the opening to create a pair of wings, offering the body up as a sacrifice to Odin. The historian Alfred Smythe writes, "It is difficult to believe that the details of this butchery were invented by a later medieval Norwegian compiler. The details explain precisely what the Blood Eagle was all about. The fact that the term Blodurn existed as a meaningful concept in the Old Norse vocabulary indicates that it constituted a ritual form of slaying in its own right. However, it seems that historians, like Smythe, are commonly in the minority. Instead, it's widely assumed that a lot of these details came from Christian storytellers who tried to retroactively make Vikings sound like savage demons sent from hell. What we do know is that Vikings would often purposefully leave their foes face down on the battlefield so they couldn't get into Valhalla, which seems a little petty, but hey, what are you gonna do? Ravens and crows would tear the backs of these corpses, pick at them, poke holes and pull at pieces, resulting in horrific injuries by the time they were discovered. Upon seeing Dillion's corpse again, the Furies turn on Senua, shrieking and screaming and roaring and damning her. This is the first time we see the Furies berate her in the game. Prior to now, they were at their worst a pack of Regina Georges, fetching of Regina Georges. After this scene, our distrust of the voices is at an all-time high, but Senua pushes through the pain and makes it to the bridge to hell. Lightning crackles, rain pours, and the lighting turns her dark blue paint to a crooked black. She nears the doorway, and we get our first look at Hela. Half of her face is grain smooth, the other is rotten, as if the darkness has gnawed away at her for years. Swinging blindly, Senua's sword shatters on Hela's skin and she's cast aside. Sapped of all strength, she gives in to the darkness's commands and sears her sword on the gash across her face. She's cauterizing the wound, but because of the framing with the deep throaty screaming of the darkness leading her on, it feels deeper. It feels like self-harm. She falls unconscious and is only awoken when a soft-spoken, youthful male voice reaches out to her. Dillion has joined the catalogue of souls that live in Senua's head. She refuses to give up and journeys on through a graveyard of ships. This is a whirlwind. We face our big bad. Senua chokes. Her sword is broken. It's revealed to us that she tried to take her own life in the past, and in the darkness and gloom, she insults and ridicules herself.
You should become a warrior, you know.
Me?
I'm Dillion. I'm here for the warrior trials. Just come and watch. And bring your sword.
Dillion leads Senua to a knotted, sprawling tree, and as she approaches, bright, luminescent shades of blue, green, and gold swoop in. Her limp is gone, her fingers brush past the flowers in bloom. This is when Senua met Dillion for the first time. He was her only support network after her mother died. He encouraged her to become a warrior, training her senses and heightening her skills. Where Galena tried to soothe Senua and Zimbel tried to subdue her, Dillion passed on the most important piece of advice in her life. Through training her, he taught her to take control of her destiny. Hellblade is a morbid, graphic game, but it remembers to use Dillion as a means to loosen its grip. He's a calming presence, and he heralds gorgeous shots like this one so he can find the joy. The tree's true form is a gnarled and knotted beast with 9 hanging bodies leering at her. It echoes Yggdrasil, the world tree that Odin hung himself from. Yggdrasil's not just here for the sake of another Norse reference, it carries with it a story that's all about willpower. Odin hung there for 9 days and 9 nights to learn the knowledge of the universe, carried by his strength of will. It's no wonder that this is the vision Senua's mind conjures here. When all seems lost, Senua's subconscious shudders with this story and produces this curled up version of it to reinforce her own strength of will. Inside the tree, she finds a blue sword, the colour of her face paint, a fitting weapon for a character based off the picked goddess of water. It's almost as if the sword was made just for her, or a sword placed there by a friendly god. This is Gram, the sword Sigurd used when he slayed the dragon Fafnir, a supposedly impossible task. It's no accident that in that legend, the sword became a sign of chastity when it was placed between Sigurd and his beloved Brynhild on their funeral pyre. It's an important symbol in the tragedy of 2 lovers, and an important symbol to Senua. It's the weapon her beloved guides her to. But to unlock that sword, Senua first needs to face the 4 trials of Odin. Whilst we don't get a flashback explicitly showing Senua undergoing the warrior trials that she fought through in the past, I would argue the purpose of Odin's 4 trials is to show us a metaphysical version of them. While Senua didn't have to fight monsters in a pitch-black void, what she probably went through was something like hunting a deer under the cover of night. Each of the trials of Odin represents a challenge Senua had to battle in the real world, so let's break each one down and see what we can learn.
You want to see what the mask sees? No, she doesn't.
Trial 1, the Tower. The Tower trial is an exploration of Senua's childhood home. We understand that Senua's father was the head druid of their village, so it makes sense that a historically inaccurate manse would have been the location that she was raised. Perhaps in this trial she had to hunt an indoor location for an item hidden by an elder. The puzzle setup here is quite simple. We can look through gigantic masks to transport ourselves and the house into the past and present. The past is cast in warm golden light, showing us Senua had fond memories of the time when her mother was still alive. The rune on the front door of the home is that of Fehu, or cattle, a positive rune meaning wealth. As we explore the house, Druth tells us the story of Baldur, the story of a happy mother and child separated by death, hinting at the worsening of Senua's psychosis when her mother died.
I am leaving!
You cannot escape the darkness. Your curse will make everyone suffer. You will have blood on your hands!
Trial 2, the Labyrinth. If the tower is representative of Senua's home, the labyrinth is representative of the village's burial mound. This is the shelter where her father Zimbel spent his days, far from his daughter. It's pleasant on the outside, simple. You'd be forgiven for humming the Shire theme as you approach it because it looks like a hobbit hole. Is Bilbo home? Navigating it is tough because it's bigger on the inside, lighting torches as we go and being careful not to get turned around. It's the simplest of the four. Ultimately, her navigator skills would have been tested in this trial. Distant pained groans clang out of the darkness. The Furies aren't trustworthy whatsoever. Sometimes they'll tell us we're going the wrong way when we're going the right way, or in my case, tell me to turn around just to see an open doorway has moved. But navigation is the least of Senua's worries. At the end of the labyrinth, we witness the moment Senua confronted her father and told him she was leaving to go and live with Dillion. It's our first official meeting of Zimbel, and he's every bit of the monster from the snippets we've picked up so far. It ends with Senua drawing her blade and storming out, leaving her father's roars in her wake. I guess we know where those pained groans are coming from. What we're really hearing here are the echoes of her father's last words, haunting her ever since. Your curse will make everyone suffer. You will have blood on your hands. The rot on Senua's arm grows.
They make up stories to fill the void. That doesn't make them true.
What if my father was right?
You have to step out of this darkness.
Trial 3, the Swamp. Those haunting words tie into the third trial. The swamp shows us Senua's experience of a mysterious sickness that spread through Dillion's village. The people of his village believed it to be a curse, when in fact it was an illness brought on from the corpses upstream by a tribe killed by the Northmen. The bodies are polluting the water supply. We can almost taste the rot. Corpses clad in robes litter the doorways of some of the homes and pile up near Valravyn gates that are inexplicably here. If I had my way, these gates wouldn't appear. It seems unnecessary to force us to deal with an illusion puzzle when Valravyn has nothing to do with this trial, but then Cert makes a spiritual appearance, so perhaps Ravenboy's here for the sake of balance. A monstrous shrieking pillar of flame chases her, calling for her head, and in a state of panic, we need to follow a winding maze of wooden walls to escape. The main problem is the flame can burst through those walls and cut her off. I struggle with this every time I play. I've trudged through that damn fire maze so many times I should know it like the back of my hand, but the sound design is so intense that it throws me off. It simulates the moment when Senua's new home blamed her for the sickness and ran her out of town. Thankfully, good guy Dillion comforts her once more, filling the hole in her life left behind by her mother.
When it comes for me, I have no power over it.
But here, for the first time, someone was there to help.
But I heard your voice. You brought me back.
Trial 4, the Blindness. The purpose of each trial is to endear us to Dillion by making him our guide. We catch him, a beacon of light leading us to the end of each zone, but in the blackened damp of a cave, his guardian role is officially fulfilled. We can't see 3 feet in front of us, so, to quote Dillion, we need to rely on what we feel and what we hear. Headphones are a must for this section. Arguably, you should be able to pass through it with your eyes closed. It's analogous of when Senua couldn't get through the darkness of her mind and she leaned on Dillion to push through. The binaural sound of a waterfall is our source of hope. The vibrations of the controller signal when we're going in the right direction. Her story might be told out of order, but Senua has a curated chronology that feels like Ninja Theory have laid it all out before working on the game. In fact, this is exactly the case. The imagery that haunts her never seems random for the sake of the bizarre, it all links to the tragedy of her past. For example, here, the stream we follow to escape the darkness is littered with bodies, likely the fallen warriors who polluted the water near Dillion's village. It's exhilarating, and then the monsters come. I've brightened the footage as best I can so you're not just glaring at pitch blackness, so hopefully you can see the beasts that devour the dark. They're bulbous, throbbing, scaly beasts that lash out at us from the void. We have to move slowly, achingly slowly to get past them, and if one gets too close we have to stop moving and hope it loses interest. What makes the sequence so tense, aside from not being able to see anything, is that sometimes freezing in place works, and sometimes it doesn't. Again, the world is unreliable. The trial of blindness ends with the most hopeful moment of the four, with Dillion leaning in close and reassuring Senua that all she needed was a little help. With all 4 trials complete, Senua marches up to the tree once more, ready to seize Graham, and the darkness returns.
Do you see it clearly now, Senua? The suffering you've caused.
Seriously, she can't catch a break. Senua's sacrifice seeps and rots, its tentacular reaching out from all directions until the horror is unavoidable. It shrieks and caws and hisses, and its unease aches, not just through its presentation of psychosis, but through the archetypes that we've come to associate with good horror. A thought aches at Senua here. The thought that Zimbel was right, the thought that Dillion turned against her when his father died of the plague. And with those aching thoughts, we're tossed into the sea of corpses. This is what hell looks like.
Even your dear beloved mother was powerless against the darkness when it came for her.
The Sea of Corpses is when Hellblade goes balls to the wall gruesome. The skybox is a malicious red. We're ankle deep in a river of blood. To even enter, we need to navigate walls of grabbing, rotting hands, snapping open and closed. The further in we get, the more corpses we see, joined by silent, screaming maws. Wave after wave of enemies appear and hack at us with shrieks and roars, and the intensity factor is at an all-time high. Senua is alone with the voice of the darkness, slithering and gnashing at her, all compounded by the fact we just witnessed our only friend tell us to go fuck ourselves. To make matters worse, we can see and hear a screaming vision of Galena begging for help. Senua calls for assistance, hoping down here someone is in her corner, but Galena can't help. Down here, her mother is weaker than Senua is. Climbing up to her forces us to scale the arm of a groaning, writhing corpse, a humongous mouth preparing to devour her. You may have been thinking up until this point that while Senua's mind conjures rotting, festering thoughts that poison her, she might have gotten off a little easy visually with her own personal Helheim. The underworld is typically presented as more viscerally gruesome than Senua's journey. Just look at Dante's Inferno, another story about someone journeying into hell to save their beloved. Come to think of it, there's a lot of classic stories that carry this central concept. The Romans have one, the Greeks have one, the Christians have one. Even prior to the Sea of Corpses, Hellblade is still terrifying. It's determined to overwhelm our senses. For some, this sensory override is so horrific that they've been too terrified to finish it, but the sickliness of stuff like how Senua's rotting arm pulses is regularly punctured by beauty and spectacle. Tonally, the game leaps between the calm whispers of Dillion to the harsh croaking of Zimbel, back to the soothing tales of Druth, to the scratching rage of the Furies. There's time for contemplation and time for fear. The ebb and flow isn't limited to just the visuals, it's in the structure and written word as well. It's no accident that Senua is robbed of her sword for at least an hour of gameplay, facing monsters and scenarios where she's intensely vulnerable. We still have agency during these moments, but that agency is limited to 2 actions: running away or trusting the voices implicitly, giving ourselves over to the madness. If Hellblade wailed and yelled and shrieked at the player all the time, this would become diluted. It's like Dillion says, Senua sees horror, but she sees beauty as well, and the memory of that beauty is always there, so we can take a breath before the more intense moments. So how does the game achieve that intensity? And why do some consider it to be a visceral horror game? We've already discussed the claustrophobic, creeping camera that links Senua's terror with our own. The badgering voices grow louder and more deformed the more we get hurt, adding literal insult to injury that would be enough to make anyone turn the game off and boot up Hades instead for their underworld fix. The volume at which enemies bark and roar at you seem tripled compared to the furies or general ambience of the world, meaning that while the game doesn't throw much at you in the way of jump scares, it can be teeth-clenchingly uncomfortable. The binaural audio is both a blessing and a curse. The sound design in the Sea of Corpses is misophonic, whether you suffer from misophonia or not. As we wade through a sea of enemies, we hear the blood slosh against our ears. David Garcia, seen here receiving a BAFTA for his work on the game and stating, "This is the highlight of my life," and Andy Naplegwa from the Norwegian band Combichrist created the music and sound design. Music was part of the creative process from the very beginning. Before there was even a vertical slice of Hellblade, conversations were being had about how to differentiate the raw, cultish horror of the Northmen from the game's calmer moments. In the Sea of Corpses, they do not hold back. Compare the somber sounds of the song Tower of Light. To the soundtrack that infects the Sea of Corpses. It embodies every terrifying sound we've heard so far, the bassy, guttural, tuneless sound of enemies in the distance on their inevitable march. We've come to fear everything about the Northmen by this part in the game, so emphasizing their alien presence makes the sound design sizzle eerily. In one of the developer diaries, Andy LaPlegua said that in the battle music, quote, "A lot of my dark side came out, and that's not just in traditional thunderous orchestrations. He experimented with all kinds of different ways to achieve chaotic, evil sounds, like drilling through guitar strings. The creature design leans into body horror, and that's pretty ironic considering how regularly the game obfuscates and hides its creatures. The rotting half of Hela's face is illuminated by the lightning and rain. She towers above Senua, much too big for us to take on, surely, and to add to our discomfort, she crawls like a newborn, birthed into reality and finding its strength. Almost every single enemy in the game, from the greatest boss to the lowliest grunt, is larger than Senua, making us feel disempowered before swords clang. The Northmen never just speak, they yell, bark and grunt, dehumanizing them further. Their monstrousness is portrayed with graying dead skin and concealed faces. It's not just that their identities are hidden, it's that the masks have been intricately designed to sit as a continuation of their head shape. The standard warrior doesn't just look like a guy wearing a skull mask, the antlers of the deer are coming out of his head, resembling demonic horns. The massive keep guards with their pointed red skulls and material stitched to their chest look like an eldritch beast swinging a weapon twice the size of Senua that could cleave her in two at any second. The monsters we get in the game are deformed, dehumanized and demented, but it's through the concept art that we can see how horror was part of Ninja Theory's approach from the get-go. Beasts like Garm or Valravyn are fascinating in their detail, their connection to legend, and how their visual design alone can teach us more about Senua's character. But nightmares like the Melted Lady or the Beast Rider clue us into what Hellblade once was back when it was a game more grandiose in scope. Senua readies her blade as she stares up at a gargantuan winged giant. It's fleshless, not because of rot or decay, but because its size means it doesn't need the protection of skin. The elements, the warriors, the monsters couldn't hurt it if they tried. Outside of the monster design, there are active attempts to replicate psychosis through Senua's eyes. Visually, this takes the form of fragmented lightning where the colours leap from vibrant to monochrome. When we slow down time in combat, Senua, her sword and our enemies suddenly have visual echoes of themselves, forcing us to squint to focus our attacks. Random dark spots will appear at inopportune moments, almost as if the game world itself is breaking apart as we jog on to the next puzzle. We can't even trust our action-adventure swordplay because enemies will become ethereal at a moment's notice, meaning rather than stagger them, we'll just throw Senua into their pointed blades. We don't trust Senua's mind, and her mind is the game world. What's more terrifying than that? Nothing is tangible, and that carries into the structure of the adventure as well.
I can't fight it anymore. Not on my own. Where are you, Mother? I want to be with you.
Hellblade isn't strictly all one shot like, say, the modern God of Wars are, but its cutaways are so few and far between that by the time the game is complete you'd be forgiven for wanting to step outside. We only ever cut to black when Senua falls unconscious or is killed in combat, and even then it's momentary. We don't get a break from the voices and pain. It's hideously claustrophobic, emulating Senua's psychology when she senses she's constantly watched or spoken to by the voices. In dialogue, we take on the perspective of whoever she's speaking to, Hela, her father, Dillion, so there's no tearing ourselves away from her. The immersion is conveyed in other ways too. There's no HUD. We couldn't activate a health bar if we wanted to. We need to monitor Senua through the visual effects, how fragmented the screen becomes, Senua's body language. Everything we see is purposefully designed to draw the player in and make us feel like we are a part of her. We are the 14th voice. After a lengthy, grueling battle, we see that Senua's new blade, gifting us with our shiny new charge attack, is a vessel for her anger and rage. The sea of corpses is her guilt and fear manifest. There is no blade sharp enough to give her the upper hand, but Graham is the only thing that offers security. The consistent motif of Senua believing she has blood on her hands is seen in the level design here. After all, the first thing she sees is both a river of blood and mutilated hands reaching out to grab her. But still she persists, breaking through and returning to the quiet, bleak comfort of agonizing darkness. Welcome to the land of mist and fog. The Orkney Islands that Senua knows is being invaded by the Northmen, and they've brought a dream with them, merging the realm she knows with all the other realms connected to the World Tree. Illusion, darkness, raging fires and blood-soaked rivers aren't all that waits for her.
Symbol was right. Everyone will suffer.
Symbol is a fake. He is a hateful, bitter liar. He's poison. And his words still haunt you.
When Senua stands at a cliff edge and Dillion stops her from jumping, the head Fury comments on how she wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps. On a first playthrough, that might make you think Galena committed suicide, but as we'll soon see, that's not what happened. All is calm as we journey back to the gate leading to Hela. The voices return, encouraging her, leading her on. She's come so far, they say, and as we pass once more across the beach and the bridge, a revelation. We passed this door before. Before the Sea of Corpses, before the trials of Odin, before the heartbreak, pain and horror, Senua could have bypassed it all if it wasn't for her delusions. Remember, the runes that block our progress are just one of the patterns that Senua sees in the world. A locked door isn't really a locked door, and any other character would have been able to push this open and head on to battle Hela much, much earlier. But Senua hallucinates monsters, so she needs to find a mythical weapon to fight. She hallucinates that she can't pull the sword from the tree, so relives 4 moments from her past. She falls into a catatonic state after the darkness gaslights her. She's been spiraling, a domino effect of mental anguish. The Furies are wrong. The player may very well be filled with dread because no, we haven't come very far at all. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So let's give Senua a breather and talk about Hellblade's world design. Vast alien vistas dominate the first half of the campaign. Even in Surt's village or Valravyn's woods, we'll see the bridge to Helheim waiting on the horizon. There's a back and forth to the horror and beauty of its world. The two ways that Senua sees the world fight to be seen or heard, but every image is spectacular. At no point in Hellblade's runtime does it tread water. The stench of the swamp is juxtaposed by the glow of Senua's family home. Odin's tree is surrounded by flowers and colour during the flashback with Dillion, opposing the disease-ridden wasteland that it quickly turns into. Even when locations are in the quote-unquote real world, they are wrong somehow. Doors dwarf Senua, not built for a Pictish warrior, but for the gods that once trod this land. A ship graveyard has Norse boats dashed on the rocks and sand violently, not brought to land by the waves, but likely by Njord, the god of the sea. This works because of the attention to detail, and I think that's really key to remember when looking at Hellblade holistically. Ninja Theory spent time researching Celtic and Viking artifacts and exhibits so that the world felt authentic. They collaborated on bloody Pinterests to brainstorm the art style. The world building in environmental art was undertaken by just one person, Dan Atwell. In theory, they wanted it to be possible for a player to feel engaged with Senua's world without interacting directly with it. Obviously, there are puzzles to solve and bad guys to fight, but the philosophy of visual intrigue underpinned how the spaces where we do those things were built. The fauna that skirts the mountainside is heather, typically seen on moors and swamplands. Shields with intricate runes and Hela's face adorn walls. Bodies are scorched and mutilated in cages. Reflections and echoes of what Senua imagines the Northmen did to her people. The game is not a visual feast because of its graphics or fidelity, though they are admittedly pretty, but because Ninja Theory have filled the landscape with cool stuff to see. The face of Galena sits behind a waterfall, an optional interaction that we'll only catch if we're looking for patterns and symbols in innocuous rock faces, the same way that Senua does.
A great beast guards Helheim. Garm is its name, and it knows you are here, Senua. It can smell your stink.
Eventually, the Furies give way to the darkness, returning bigger and badder than before. He warns that there is a beast hot on our heels, our third boss, Garm. This is the mountain system Odin would use to gain access to Helheim whenever he needed to consult with Hela. Nippa Cave in Norse poetry. Garm would often bark at Odin as he rode in to meet the goddess of death. Very little is explicitly known about the beast, aside from the fact he guarded this cave and, as Druth tells us, is to canine what Odin is to gods. If you wanted to be really clever, you could argue that Garm and Fenrir, the famous great wolf from a bunch of Norse stories, are probably the same creature, but justifying this would be a whole video in itself, so see this beast however you like. Just know that it's hot on Senua's trail and is the absolute worst. Dealing with him means we have to keep in the light where he can't catch us. We can't see him, not yet, but are simply aware that we need to race from light source to light source to avoid his bite. The second we're in the shadows, the screen winds to a sickly colour with flashing images over Senua, making it difficult to find the next torch. It's like that scene from Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. The way the game uses colour to dramatise Senua's headspace is important and intentional. To quote Dan Atwell, "The majority of levels are made with individual kit parts to edit with speed, but we use real-world references to set lighting and atmospherics that dynamically change to portray Senua's mood." I've noted prominently the colours that leak into the game during pivotal emotional beats, but they're always hypersaturated when Senua's psychosis swallows her. As she races further into the mountain, she's faced with a stark, bleeding vision of her mother Galena, locked behind doors, her soul kept in Helheim.
So full of hate. I just want to help them.
It's another live-action blend, and this appears to be more of a memory than any of the others that we've seen so far. Galena defends the actions of Senua's father in beating them, saying he only does it to silence the voices. But based on everything we've seen so far, his abuse did anything but that. It likely made them worse. The door blocking our progress has 3 runes on it: Hunyo, Atholo, and Thurisaz. All of them connect to Senua's mother. Hunyo means joy or ecstasy, such as the emotion Senua feels when speaking to Galena again after all these years. Atholo means inheritance. Senua inherited her mother's psychosis, her darkness. And Thurisaz means danger and suffering, words to describe Zimbel's abuse. The mountain has very tight arenas full of Northmen, meaning our previous reliable agility, being able to dodge out of the way, is practically useless here. We must rely on our parrying abilities to get through the mountain, organically upping the difficulty curve. Senua is simply more vulnerable in this space, and we need to rely on the voices more than ever to make it through unscathed. In contrast to this tightness, the land of mist and fog was originally pitched as much more open. The central citadel in the middle of the map would branch out like the central spokes of a wheel, and Senua would have more freedom in where she goes and how she explores. In the game we play today, the levels are tighter and more streamlined. Backtracking does happen, but it's rare. The level design is integral to the storytelling. This is the case for most games, but in a title like Hellblade, where Senua's personality is conveyed through the environment, each path and puzzle contributes directly to her mental state. The confined, labyrinthine structures and the eerie, often unsettling environments mirror how Senua feels, enhancing the player's connection to her experience. It's a great way for the game to emulate how Senua feels without physically slowing us down. Our speed is never regulated in Hellblade, even when she's hurt. Senua might clutch her arm and show that she's injured, but she doesn't hobble or agonizingly crawl for long periods of time, despite numerous situations lending itself to that sort of gameplay. That might seem like a weird thing to pick up on, I know, but anybody who's slogged through the sequel will understand why this structure matters in the first game. The environment, the level design, and the way her psychosis contextualizes the latest piece of gameplay is more than enough to make us empathize with Senua. You don't need to spend 20 minutes wriggling up a cliff to know she's having a shit time of it. Eventually, Senua stands at the ready to face the monstrous Garm, the embodiment of her darkness.
I warn you, Senua. I can smell your...
No!
You betrayed your god.
The Hellhound and the Darkness speak with the same voice, with similar inflections, insulting Senua in separate ways. I'm not saying Garm has been taunting us this whole time, but that is how Senua sees it. This is her battle against the darkness. It's the most important fight in the whole game. Garm's design is as disgusting as we might have imagined. He's riddled with holes, like a generation of spears have pierced his hide. His tusks are deadly, and he's by far the largest enemy we've had to battle yet, with great crunching attacks that easily knock Senua on her feet. His most disturbing attack, where he carpets the world in darkness and hides in it just to rush us quickly, is arguably the game's one and only dick move. The Furies don't help with it, giving no indication where he's coming from, and if he collides with us, it can do a heap of damage. This is where the audio plays a major role. We need to identify his location through the sound of his growls and patter of his feet. Your best bet when he charges is to use slow if you've managed to fill it up, because it illuminates him. But that's not the end of the story, because Garm can counter that by turning ethereal. He's not just the most challenging boss in the game, he is the toughest fight out of both Hellblade titles. That's not saying much though, is it, Hellblade 2? For the first time in the whole game, we get a sense of true hatred from our Pictish warrior. Something about Garm sets her off, with a loathing she reserved when fighting Surt or even Valravyn. This is because Garm represents her father. The darkness represents her father. The holy trinity of Senua's psychosis, the father, the son, and the spooky spirit. Both the darkness and Zynbel share a voice actor. Stephen Hartley's deep, rumbling, bassy voice characterizes their monstrousness. We've learned that Zynbel abused Senua, likely trying to find a spiritual answer to her mental illness. It's implied he was the one who gave it that name, the darkness. As a result, a lot of Senua's mental torture can be attributed to how he made it worse after the death of her mother. The game tells us to unmask fear, and once we've slain Garm and ripped the darkness away, all that's left is Senua's father. Zynbel does what all smart abusers do. He asks for forgiveness and tells her that everything he did for her own good.
She couldn't say which was worse. The darkness, or the monster that her father had become.
Despite the realizations Senua's come to, she still responds. I know, she says. Climbing up and through the mountain, we reach the Hall of Helheim. Senua marches on and the Furies come to their own realization. In the torrent of mocking and teasing, telling her that she's inevitably going to die, one of the Furies asks a stark question. Doesn't that mean we'll die too? A barrage of begging follows. Turn back, I don't want to die, Senua, please, but Senua hushes them. Finally ready to face Hela, she turns to the Furies and tells them that she doesn't care. She has to do this. We have to do this. She's come all this way. It's time to save Dillian's soul. But before she can continue, there's one more memory to bring to the surface. Her mother's murder at the hands of Zynbel.
You see it, Senua? You see the darkness, faces fear and suffering. You can see it.
Galena being burned at the stake like a witch for hearing voices is how she died. Not through taking her own life, but through the ignorance and madness of her husband. The last image Senua sees is her mother's face. Half of it is black and burned, just like how her delusions have characterized Hela. This quest wasn't just about saving Dillian's soul, it was about coming to terms with Galena's murder at Zynbel's hands. All for having the same condition that Senua has. It's like Druth told us at the beginning. The burning of a corpse will take you straight to Hela's gate. Let me show you something. This is a painting called The Fairy Feller's Master Stroke. It took its artist, Richard Dadd, 9 years to complete. It shows various fae folk gathered round the new moon's shine to see the feller crack a nut at night's noontime. To swing his axe, he swears. As he climbs, he dares to deliver the master stroke. And yes, those are Queen lyrics from their song based off this painting. Dadd suffered from schizophrenia. He had a psychotic episode leading to him killing a man, and for years following that incident, he toiled on the painting. What he created was anticipatory and fantastical. The fae wait for the feller to crack a walnut. Everything has been leading up to this moment when the only recognizable object in the painting will shatter. What will happen when it does? Will reality go with it? Why does psychosis lend itself so well to Hellblade's setting? It would be all too easy to make the whole game a kaleidoscope of hallucinations and fantasy, but the experience is so grounded that for large portions it is difficult to distinguish what's in SENUA'S head and what's just part of the magical setting of the game. Are the voices Furies guiding SENUA, or just an echo of her trauma? Do the Northmen really dress like that? Or has her mind warped and twisted them? Does she really go through Odin's trials to pull a sword from a tree like the legends of old? Or is she reeling from dark memories and past horrors? The age of Celts and Vikings was rife with superstition and an intrinsic belief that the gods were real, that unexplainable things just happened, that magic ran through the current of the world. Carvings of the goddess SENUA existed for a reason. People like Zimbel worshipped gods and gave sacrifices to higher powers for a reason. Grand delusions that gave structure and order to the world were all accepted on the Isle of Orkney, so it all melds with SENUA'S psychosis. From an outsider's perspective, how different was SENUA really from people who believed witches exist and they had to be burnt at the stake? To be clear, I'm not saying that people who find comfort in religion suffer from psychosis, but presenting a game in the age of giants and magical swords and raven warriors blends the game isms with the harrowing psychological torture that SENUA'S mind inflicts on her. Blending, I think, is a great way to describe the portrayal of SENUA'S psychosis, so, you know, great writing, me. Aside from the Sea of Corpses, there aren't psychosis levels separated from the game's standard levels. SENUA'S mind constantly changes and invades each situation she finds herself in, regardless of the context. The only voice that gets an effect placed on it in post is Druth's.
I will tell you of a great hero named Sigurd, son of Sigmund, no less. Born after his father's death, Sigurd is cared for by the dwarf Rain. But Rain does not love the boy. Instead, he plans to use him for his own ends.
He echoes. The Furies don't, meaning they sound more natural and less mystical. There's intense honesty to how all of this is characterized, and that carries into the conceptualization of SENUA herself. Tamim Antoniadis said in one of their first development diaries, "The goal is to create a character of intense realism, beauty, anger, and history." And to achieve that, Ninja Theory worked with mental health experts and consulted with people who suffer from psychosis, getting their input on portions of the game so the whole thing feels comprehensive, integrated. That integration shatters in the closing minutes.
Those rituals, the years of isolation, the pain that still haunts you. It was the only way to fight the curse within you.
Unmasking fear and seeing the truth, SENUA sees Hela for what she truly is. Not a god, but a figment of the darkness. The atmosphere presented to us in the game's final moments is palpable. The colours have bled away, the level is painted in harsh shades of black and white. The blue of SENUA'S paint and sword, the red of the blood soaking her skin, and the browns of her clothes are the only glimpses of the outside world. The rain pours, distinct lightning flashes illuminating Hela, waiting in the distance. As SENUA charges towards this ultimate representation of her pain, we see winding bridges leading to nowhere. The conclusion of the game is the most otherworldly location we've seen. Yes, even more otherworldly than the Sea of Corpses. It morphs and warps as SENUA races through it. The bridges break away and reform, but now SENUA doesn't need to focus to repair the world. It fractures and rebuilds of its own volition. What follows are a series of gauntlets, and the final battle can go on as long as the player wants it to. First, standard representations of the Northmen swing out of nothingness. Zimbel's voice continues to taunt her, telling her to give in to the darkness, but we fight on. The voices seem weaker here somehow, not as useful. They don't shout orders, they just meekly tell us to be careful as we battle our enemies. We fight black, globular versions of the game's bosses. Just like how SENUA'S preconceived notions of how her world works begins to break away, so too do the mythical creatures she believes she's battled up until this point. Depending on our skill level, our determination to engage with the delusion, we can fight for as long as we like. The only way to finish the game, to truly reach the end, is for the player and SENUA to admit that, no, there is no Hela boss fight. We can't bring Dillion back. SENUA needs to accept that her beloved and her mother are gone. She already learned what she needed to know after her battle with Garm. There's nothing to achieve from indulging any longer. And just in case the player doesn't figure this out themselves, the platform we are battling on begins to shake and rumble, meaning Senua needs to contend with her strikes being interrupted by earthquakes beneath her feet, leaving her exposed. After taking so much damage, after we put our controller down to give in, Senua collapses.
If you were alive, and there's no darkness, then you never took him from me, did you? And I can't save doing it.
Hela pads towards her, picks up Senua's god-killing blade as she crawls to Dillian's head, clinging to it just like how she clung to the idea that she can bring him back. Pitifully, Senua looks up to Hela and admits to herself that this is all a lie. Hela never took Dillian from her. His death was just a product of savagery. It's finally time to seek Hela's truth and mirror. Gods betray us. Unmask fear. Senua's mind spirals and she falls through each stage of grief. Denial, she refuses to believe she can't bring Dillian back. Anger, filled with a fiery rage, she calls Hela a liar. Bargaining, she offers up her soul in his place, promises to fight for Hela at Ragnarok. Depression, she quietly sobs as Hela plunges deep into her. It isn't until she sees Dillian again that she reaches acceptance, where he tells her to embrace her darkness, her psychosis, her trauma, and learn to live with it, to just keep going, no matter what. We watch Hela pick up Dillian's head, and reaching the edge, she stops, refusing to throw herself off of it. Instead, hearing her mother's calming, soothing words, the mother she mourns just as much as she mourns her beloved, Senua leaves Dillian behind, finally accepting his death. As we reach acceptance, looking out across the land, we hear the Furies giggling and laughing, but remarking that something seems different somehow. Senua turns into the camera and acknowledges us, the newest Fury, for the first time. She encourages us to follow her and the others. We have another story to tell, she says, and she marches on to the next chapter. But where she's going, we won't learn, because Hellblade resolves itself nicely, satisfyingly. It's the perfect self-contained story that doesn't need a sequel. Right? In 2024, Ninja Theory released Hellblade 2, SENUA'S Saga, an unnecessary sequel, a disappointing follow-up, and a tech demo masquerading as a game. It carries good intentions, but it was such a letdown that when the credits rolled, I started to doubt my memory of Hellblade 1. Had I missed something? Was Hellblade always bad? No, it wasn't. I came back to Senua's Sacrifice with trepidation, but as Senua accepted the darkness within and turned away from Hela, I knew that I had to remake my critique of this game.
Rob me of courage, my heart's a natural ghost.
The experience that Ninja Theory crafted, the person they created, the journey they took her on, is so intimate, so loving in its cruelty and beautiful in its madness that my first attempt simply didn't do it justice. Which brings me back to the question I asked at the very start.
Where would you go? I'll take you there. It's a long way to anywhere. I will not wait or worry, knowing that love's a hurry.
When all seems lost, when it seems like the sky itself is crashing down on you, what do? You do what Senua does. You just keep going. Thanks for watching. I redid this critique for two reasons. The first is I don't think the original did this game justice, and I cringe a little when I try to watch it back. And the second reason is to prepare for my video on Hellblade 2. Expect a critique on the sequel before the year is out. On screen now are my patrons, who help keep the lights on and get versions of videos like this one ad and sponsor free. Quick announcement, Editing Monty, just jumping in here towards the end. There are now so many of you that reading out all of my patrons takes about 10 minutes, which kills retention, and according to my analytics, I don't think anyone's actually sitting through 10 minutes of names just to hear their own. So, after this video, I'm going to select a handful of patrons, read them out, and then we'll cycle through the list as more videos come out. Sound good? Okay, back to old Monty. So, without further ado, a big fat thank you to Casey Deathrow Penley, John Urquhart, Kasim Ali, Sefit, David Stoppel, Starseeker, Joshua Lepore, Lenny Yule, D, Sean Ortiz, Average Nerd, Tiffany, Albert, Wolfslore, H1SD, Key is Dead by Disco Dancing, Christian Merenga, Veyrush, Douglas Rintel, Elite Zero, Nathan Porter, Angelou Politis, Tints, C.S. Thomas, Tom Doge, Coffee Vice, Jess Little, Curry in a Hurry, Ranger Ghost 24, Queen Gedrin, Nick Breda, Marvin Parker, Corrine, The Robodog, Anonymous Patron, Tom Johnston, G.I. Monkey 98, Andy Cluel, Old Reaver, Ethan Toombs, Brian Bassel, Camille Lemieux, Livonian Bloodhound, Varen Metal, G. Sears, Flash Wayne Arrow, Hunter Stratfold, William Spear, Benton Zielinski, Tiblet, Ludwig, Atik, Aki665, Millennial Falcons, Lena Fitch, Kevin Welch, Dula Derp, The Cowboy, Gene Jezebel, Billy Morris, Raduni, Christian R. Padarath, Curson Wallace, Mr. Doctor 666, Kiasi, Lucas Dakami, Cuba Despot, Aaron N. Smith, Ben Stathatos, Jennifer R., Dova112, Asnal B16, Luca Granenfelder, Gotbots, Molly Mock Shepherd, Blake Davenport, Tony V, Alvin Sawyer, Sia Aqua, Beta Rimba, Frank Hinojosa, Rachel G, Lee, Joseph Connolly, Bean Daddy, Sodom Brute, Peggy, The Great KDB, Brock Howe, Samuel Kojo, Charlie Cray, Cage in the House, Cy Qualia, Stanko Man, Daniel Lopez, Jonas Morphus, Yoli Rodriguez, Sage Page, Danny DeFito, Jaeger, Megan Lamb, Paul M, Infamous, Dr. Prof Sr., Brandon Franklin, Matthias Persson, Elizabeth Casillas, Six Ribbons, EE, Rucky, Mr. Yako 12, Minato Mendoza, Matt Harnett, Roach, Smash Capitalism, Alistair Zessie, Noah Cowden, Jaden Pilcher, B. Warren, Rusty, Victor Loshlan, Chris Holben, Evelyn, Casual Log, Adam Susi, Brendan Barry, Corey Neighbours, Ryan Adams, Zach Gallardo, Jacoby Perez, Gideon Davis, RG Gray, Klaus, Mr. Supertash, Osaz D, Leonardo LF, Clockworks, Kieran Tregus, Patty Boy, Alfred Correa, LWPS, Liam Major, Revolver Axolot, Beezus Labs, Kimotale Kareem, Alden Crane, Parzival Grail, Chill NXD, Cash Kachalek, Oliver James, Beat, Nebulous, Doobly Doop, Manuel Moore, Not Quite Chrome, I Make Stuff, Shiny Purple Pants, Dan Schwartz, Liam Major, Emil Lagarde Bovbjerg, James Bruce, Shy Monkeys, NT Singh, Fisher Palachek, Captain Phantasma, Mager, Ash Mearns, Wampo, AI Monogatari, Grumbo, Prof Comic, Zentu, Liana Quill, Shy Doomguy, Eremit, Aurelia, Stephen Grapes, Keegan Diamond, Icky Jones, Graham Reed, Rosie Vera, Elijah Simpson, Meanswell, Major Simmer, Louis Almanza, Cariad1709, Shaldar, Mr. Mundus, Kyle Chamberlain, Carl, Vlad M, Greg, Gwen Grayson, Rocketman, Wild Weaver and Worm, Mitch Miller, Roy, Kamikan, Blake Foster, Sean Ryland, Anthony Santilli, Zelatath, Violet Dickinson, Hoss, Daisy May, Dianian, Caleb Jablanicki, Nick T, Ben E, JMC 147, Melvin Kitnick, Nicholas Chase, Siddhant Pandey, Jack Shepherd, Western Pate, Crimson Fangs, A Lonely Cow, The Iron Giant, Crazy Kirsch, Oliver Bensrid, Eek Lieb Capitalismus, Trevor A. Elliott, Daniel Finnegan, Warren Blythe, Barbalith, Luke Hughes, Noah Littrell, Charlotte Rosewood, Full Metal Wolf, Serge Fent, Rosie Rowland, Weather Waxing, Eunice Mikolai, Mr. Alienated, Lugoil, Funnyman 1257, Nathan Mallory, Hurry Up Snufkin, Grim Ally, Vadim Orlov, Joe Pierce, Mr. Gusty, Nikolai Jorgensen, Damon, James Edney, Joe, AJ, Jubilation Chambers, Abram Partida, Abby, Chancellor Delamere, Jeff Howe, Ronald McRonald, Raymond Ryan, Murderous Lord, Evan Schrader, Domus Knox, Mayday in Paradise, Adam Harrison Fuller, Eric Evans, Andy Seco, Joe Humphreys, Flair Darkstorm, Akadea, Quiet Ambassador, Paul Thomas, David Riata, Jerry Humes, Turticus Rex, Joe Monty, Alec Meacham, Jake Cascade, Chris Duran, Ginger Kappa, David Neal, Holton, Misfit Musica, Michael Smith, Daniel Tarek, Prudvi Muva, Thomas Evans, Samantha P, Dapper Cyborg, Wob76, Techno Dan, When Goats Attack, Tenic, Mike Cripps, Vincent the Hollow Knight, Meowners, Mad Gab, Reviter, Webby, Nur Revel, Eve, Tyler Cox, Procrastinator, EP Horry, Unlucky Dragon, Nikki Deedles, Gaming University, Eddie Black, Abby the Bard, Alina Buck, Combat Wombat, Top Hat Tiger, Chase, Wayward Flock, Fluffy the Demon Destroyer of Worlds, Thomas Pruitt, Spalter, Daniel Boyles, Shishki, Vivi, Mija, Ridge Miedema, Alec Maxwell, The Vegan Necromancer, I Got Consent, Captain Cabinet, Logan Hamilton, Danger Zone, Chris McMullen, Never Lupus, Ryan Bryce, Ryan, Matthew Halsey, Sean Toland, Jerome Hotchkiss, Prodigal Horse, Trenchcoat Guy, Cody, Kyle P. Feely, Garrett Birchall, Chachesvaz76, Jack, Neil Mack, Sam's Forge, Joey Isbell, Christian Fenchel, Patrick Baird, LGX, Big Boar Wolf, Nicholas Chemin, Trevor Vernon, Joel Wilcox, Blank Name, Leon, X Wrights, Shamax, Jonathan Riggs, Zachary Johnson, DNSCH, Monacari, ZK, Lamar825, Ike N, Tempe, Unicourt, David J. Moran, Mini Otto, Callum Armitage, Christopher Tierney, Torstein Sunness, Fipsy, Sammy Stuff, Jagger Alberto Calles, Zachary Powers, Andrew Munoz, Prospero, Alan Black, Callsign Nor, David Bedard, Mukor, John Foster Ragg, Robert Capel, Chief Sweep, Jonathan Lum, Mr. Fredo Renton, Long Cheddar, Talkster, 100 Sams, My Friend Neil, Nathaniel Waters, Dinkin Pearson, Kyle Pears, Kane Highwind, and Johnny Miller. Thank you all so much, and take care.